In this town, the sheriff's cruel greed led to the public humiliation of an innocent girl, Mary. He wanted not only to steal her land but to completely break her spirit to terrorize the entire town. But no one expected that a broken man named Cain, who had long lost his faith, would step out of the shadows to defy destiny. Listen to this story to find out how one brave act not only brought back hope but also delivered long-awaited justice. Please, if you enjoy this video, like and subscribe. Let's start. A hot, dry haze hung over the main street. The only sound interrupting the oppressive silence was the booming voice of the sheriff. Standing on a makeshift stage, he reveled in the moment, performing a spectacle for the entire town. A cruel, smug smile played on his face. Standing beside him was a young woman, Mary. She didn't cry or beg. Her gaze was fixed somewhere in the distance, and this quiet defiance only angered the sheriff more. He was selling her family's ranch, the last of their inheritance, for debts he had invented himself. In the crowd, under the shade of an awning, stood Cain. His face was hidden under the wide brim of his hat, and his arms were crossed over his chest. He was a stranger, a man who had long ago buried his belief in justice, and he simply watched. He saw how fear had gripped the townspeople and how a lust for power burned in the sheriff's eyes. But when the sheriff moved on to the most humiliating part and the last thing she has left, something shifted inside Cain. He saw in Mary's eyes a reflection of the same despair that was in his wife Kate's eyes many years ago. Without a second thought, Cain stepped forward. The sound of his boots on the creaking boards echoed across the square. He poured all his money onto the table. "That's enough to cover her debts, Sheriff. She's a free woman." The crowd gasped. The sheriff went pale with rage, while Mary looked at her rescuer with deep suspicion. Why did he do it? And who was he? The ride to the ranch was long and silent. Dust rose from the horses' hooves, and the sun beat down mercilessly. Neither of them said a word. Mary rode behind, her gaze fixed on Cain's broad back. She was on guard, trying to understand the motives of this man. Why did he save her? What did he expect in return? She had no answers, only a growing unease. The ranch was just like its owner, a scorched, abandoned place where there was no hope and no life. The house stood alone, with a sagging roof and empty windows, like a ghostly monument to some old tragedy. Cain showed her where to stay and gave her food, but kept his distance as if she were an unwelcome guest. He didn't try to comfort her, and Mary didn't try to thank him. She saw in him not a savior, but just another dangerous man. One day, while cleaning the dusty house, she stumbled upon an old, yellowed notebook. It was his wife's diary, Kate's. On one of the pages was her last letter to him. Mary couldn't resist and read, "Please, don't let them break you. Don't lose the fire that burns inside. Remember what we believed in." In that moment, Mary understood. She no longer saw Cain as just a man living in solitude. She saw a man who had been broken. He hadn't bought her freedom. He had bought himself a chance to reclaim the faith he had buried with his wife. The silence at the ranch was deceptive. It was abruptly shattered when a group of riders galloped up to the house. They were the sheriff's men. They surrounded the house, their faces full of malice, and rifles gleaming in their hands. The sheriff stayed behind, watching as his men began to break windows and set fires. But Cain was ready. He fired, and one of the attackers fell. Gunshots rang out in return, bullets pounding against the walls of the shack. Mary, without flinching, grabbed a rifle and stood beside him, providing cover. She was not a passive victim. She was his ally. They fought side by side, their actions in sync. Cain would shoot, and Mary would reload his weapon while he took cover. When the sheriff's men began to retreat, the sheriff himself appeared, his face contorted with rage. He smirked, looking at them. "Did you think you could just pay to change a life, Cain? No, your faith in good got her killed, and it will get this one killed too. Do you think it will be different this time?" His words were not just a threat, but a direct blow to Cain's most painful memory. Could they protect their new world? A gallows stood in the main square, where Cain and Mary were waiting. But instead of an execution, Cain challenged the sheriff to a duel. This time he was not alone. Mary stood behind him, and the townspeople, inspired by their actions, also gathered to watch this confrontation. Cain was no longer a broken man. His belief in justice had returned, and he was fighting for it. The duel was short but tense. The sheriff pulled out his revolver, but Cain was faster. A fatal shot echoed through the town, and the sheriff fell. Then Cain, instead of just walking away, lowered his revolver and looked at the crowd. "He did this to me. He did this to Mary's family. He did this to all of you," he shouted. And, Turning, he pointed to an old, timid man standing in the back of the crowd. Tell them, John, tell them what you saw. John, a former farmer the sheriff had forced to sign forged documents to take Kane's land, had been a witness to the tragedy with Kate. He had stayed silent out of fear for his own family. Now, seeing Kane's victory, he found the strength. He stepped forward, and his words, at first quiet, grew louder. He told how the sheriff had threatened him, and how he had been a witness to Kate's murder. Hearing the truth, the crowd roared with rage. They were no longer passive. The townspeople, inspired by Kane's actions and the witnesses' words, surrounded the remaining sheriff's men and took them into custody. They were arrested for their complicity in murder, theft, and conspiracy, evidence of which was right there in John's testimony. Kane turned to Mary, and for the first time in years, his eyes shone. "Thank you for saving me," he said. She took his hand. On that day, at the auction, he bought himself a life he could believe in again, and finally fulfilled Kate's last wish.